Special guest this evening is Captain Henry Kroll. And Henry, he's kind of a regular on the show these days, which I love to have. It's always a pleasure to have him on. He has fantastic information to share with us. And Captain Henry Kroll is an adventurer, aviator, miner, commercial fisherman, inventor, entrepreneur, and outstanding writer. Henry has authored several books available on Amazon.com, one of which is Cosmological Ice Ages. His website is www.guarddog.books.com and also www.alaskapublishing.com. And it is with great pleasure we welcome Captain Henry Kroll to the show this evening. Hello there, ahoy!
Yeah, good evening, Solaris. I really appreciate you having me on. And it's a beautiful day here in Alaska.
Yeah? What's the weather?
Temperatures were up to 42 degrees during the daytime, and it's down to around 38 right now, I guess, something like that.
Well, that sounds great. That sounds wonderful. So how you been? Let's fill everybody in on what you've been up to.
Well, for the last 10 days, I've been in what they call Heritage House, pumping iron over there. I had a hip operation on February 26th, and they went pretty well, except I had worn out the hip socket so bad that the poor doctor, he couldn't get it lined up. It wouldn't stay in joint there, and I had to lay there in pain for 8 hours, and they put me on a lot of Oxycontin, and he had to operate on me again that evening after he'd rested up a little bit, open her back up and straighten it out and figure out what was wrong. And it's been working really fine after that, but I'm glad it's over with, and I can walk around pretty good right now after about 10 days of physical therapy. And physical therapy is really interesting. You know, they got these bicycle-like machines, and you can either pump your arms or your legs on these. And I was doing 15 to 20 minutes on those, and then twice a day. They do it early in the morning. They put schedules up there. And they give you pain pills so you can just work hard just to build muscle, you know. Mm-hmm. And then they lay you out on a mat and try to straighten your body out with various, have you move your muscles and legs around so that maybe hopefully it'll develop more muscle. I couldn't raise my right leg at all. Maybe I've got to the point where I could raise it a half an inch off the mat before I left there, but it's slowly coming back, you know. And I can walk just fine with a cane, and things are working out okay.
I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, you sound fantastic for someone who just went through surgery, so you sound good.
Yeah, the bill was $157,000, and that doesn't count the additional X-rays and the additional other stuff that they did in the other locations around there. So it's well over $160,000 so far to get this. You could buy a house,
Henry. You could buy a house for that.
Yeah. Well, titanium hip on there. Yeah, well, it's a good thing I don't have a house. Otherwise, they'd probably take it away from me.
So I hope your insurance covered some of that. That's a lot of money.
Yeah, it is. You know, I could have maybe got it done in Seattle or some other place for a lot less, but then again, then you have to fly back and forth and spend a lot of time away from home down there, you know. So
right.
I don't know. It's a toss-up. I think I'd be able to work pretty good next summer and get around much better. Mm-hmm. That's the point. Now, I'd like to talk a little bit about Alaska. My neighbors over there, they're very interesting characters to begin with. And then later on, if you can remind me, I've been working on a book before I had the operation about 4 weeks. It's about giants and our relationship with these giants, you know, all over the earth. And the mainstream press and the government can no longer deny their existence. Mm-hmm. Because they've been digging up so many skeletons all over in Russia and Romania and you name it, every place in China. And I put lots and lots of pictures in the book. And I think it may be too controversial to publish, but I am emailing copies to friends. And I emailed you a copy. I don't know if you received it or not.
You know, I don't know if I did, actually. I'll double check, but if you have it, I'll let you know. But you know what? There have been books out on giants, so I don't think it's that controversial. More and more people are talking about it. So, yeah. Let's get that thing published.
I looked up the title on the internet to see if I was going to be infringing on when the giants came back or, you know, or something like that, when the giants arrive and, you know, different titles for the thing. But anyway, I was born in Seldovia, Alaska, which is a little town on the Kenai Peninsula near the tip. And back in those days, in the 40s, the weather was much, much colder in Alaska. It would go down to 30, 40 below zero. 20 below zero in Seldovia wasn't uncommon.
Mm-hmm.
And ships could not go up to Anchorage, Alaska at that time. There was no way they could run steel ships up there in the winter. There's just too much ice. And of course, they have it dredged out now, and the weather is moderated to the point where we didn't even get zero weather this winter. It was like 20 degrees or 18 or 15 degrees. It's the coldest we had all winter long, which I really like it here now.
Mm-hmm.
We can't grow bananas, but anyway, it's a lot warmer than it used to be.
Right. Well, it's definitely changing. All the weather patterns are shifting, right?
Yeah, in 1942, which is before I was born, they had the coldest winter there ever, and I have a photograph of the boats, and they're all froze to the bottom of the slough, in Seldovia Slough, and the tide came over them and swamped all of the fishing boats, the gas boats. They had gas engines in those days. And there's one smart guy who's a friend of my dad's and my friend, and they called him Whitey Wadsworth. He had been in the Navy. He went out there with a garden hose, and he sprayed fresh water all over his boat, and the tide came over it. It was coated with freshwater ice, and it didn't swamp his engine or anything. So he saved his boat out by spraying water on it.
Wow, that's awesome.
Well, anyway, my father was a really, really hard worker. He came out of the Depression, and, you know, he was really ambitious, and people had to really work hard those days. There were 14-hour, 16-hour days was not unheard of, or just for wage earners. And, you know, sometimes he'd work 2 days straight and then sleep 12 hours when he was fishing. And he put together a 50-foot long wood barge. There was 18-foot beam, and he cut all the lumber for it, all the timbers, and drug them over to Seldovia with another boat and piled them up on the beach and put oil over them to treat them. And then he built this scow in 1942 and 43. I think they launched it in 43, and he had a floating cannery on it, and he processed fish 1 year with it. And then he couldn't go back to that location because they put stream markers up on the stream where he was catching fish. So he went across Cook Inlet to Tuck Sidney Bay. Well, Tuck Sidney was a Russian map maker, and they named it was named after him. And the place names over there, like Chiswick Island, were all Russian names at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a long bay. It's about 50 miles from Seldovia across Cook Inlet on the west side, and it's 16 miles long bay, and has this 2,800 foot tall island at the mouth of it called Chiswick Island, and it's about 7 miles long, or 6 miles long, I guess. And there's a cannery was constructed on the southwest tip of the island. It's in 1910 by George Palmer, and it was designed to can clams, but after that, a guy came from Sweden and bought it. His name was Freebrock, and he turned it into a salmon cannery. And I put, over the many years, I put well over 1 million pounds into that processing plant before the 1960s. It closed down about 68, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And anyway, I had a neighbor that lived about 50 miles, or that's a neighbor, by the way, and that location is very, very few people. So my nearest neighbor was like 45 miles to the south along the coast at Silver Salmon Creek. And he came there in 1948 from Minnesota, and he was a trapper. His name was Joe Munger. And he learned to trap in Minnesota, but, you know, Alaska's a little different place, and the weather was colder, longer winters up here.
Mm-hmm.
But he did build a nice cabin and outbuildings, and right near the stream. It's a nice stream, beautiful country. Silver salmon run up there in the summertime. Well, he got lonely one time, and he met a lady in Washington, in Seattle, not Seattle, but in Anchorage on the street there, and her name was Sally, and he asked her, how would you like to come down and, look at my homestead? And she says, oh, okay, and so he chartered an airplane, a 180 on floats, Cessna, I guess, And they flew down there, and he gave the pilot an extra $20, and he said, you just when she gets off the plane, you just throw her bags off on the beach and take off, go back, go to Anchorage. And he did, and Sally's got out, and she's looking around. She says, hey, this is really nice, and she's looking around, and then the plane took off. She turns her head around, looks at it, and she says, where is he going? So that's how you get your wife in Alaska. You just kidnap them. Well, after about a month, the plane came back, but they got married and settled down together and lived for a very long time, and several decades. She was from Las Vegas originally and was a keynote dealer down there, but she was a very good-hearted person, more of a mystic type, and the tarot cards and things.
Nice. That's
and
good.
So, Joe Munger, he had a tough time learning to commercial fish. He just couldn't run a boat, a skiff, or anything. And he had to deliver salmon to a tender boat anchored up in front of the cannery there, or at the cannery dock, either one. And current runs quite strong there, about 2 or 3 knots, so you got to approach the tender at a pretty good clip. And then he shut his motor off and run forward with his arms in the air, and like he's going to grab something out of the air. And the skiff would bounce off the fenders, and he'd touch and it would get away from him, and he'd drift back downstream, and he'd do that again. He'd have to do that like 3 or 4 times. And we're waiting for him to deliver his fish so that we can deliver, and it just about drove you crazy to watch him. At one point, he just gave up and just threw out his anchor. And the channel's about like a couple 100 foot deep right there. So he had all this anchor chain out and a big old halibut anchor, and it took him forever to pull it all back up again. And you could just see he was really straining to do it. Mm-hmm. But it took him about 10 years, and he got all that down. He could just land his skiff and no problem. He's really good at it. It's just amazing. Mm-hmm. But he told me a story. He was also watchman. He and Sally were watchmen for the Snug Harbor cannery there one winter, or several winters, I think. But he built a skiff there in the cannery. Well, I was just 20 years old at the time, or 22, I think. And I had bought a boat called a Nightmare, and I was going to go across the inlet, and I was anchored up there waiting for weather, and Sally Munger was getting ready for winter. Well, she was cleaning out all the freezers. They have these big rounds of cheese and stuff in the cool room, and they leave them there all winter. And by spring, it'd have mold growing on it, and then they want to throw it out. And I would grab that cheese just as fast as I could, because that stuff was the best. You scrape the mold off, and it had a wonderful flavor.
Oh, wow.
Anyway, old Sally, she was going to clean these freezers out. So they had all this frozen Wonder Bread. It's been in the freezer all year long, and it's all dried out. She kept that, see. But also was a freezer full of dough that you could. They had 5 loaves in a package, and you just open them up, cellophane bag, and you pop it in the oven and bake these nice loaves of bread with fresh bread. Mm-hmm. Well, she threw that out and kept the old Wonder Bread to feed Joe, which was, she just wasn't thinking. Mm-hmm. She could have had nice fresh bread all winter, but Joe, these big things are about almost 2 foot by 18 inches of bread. She threw it all off the dock, and it was floating all over the tidewater. And the minute it thawed out, the yeast in the bread would expand the bags, and the seagulls were diving on this stuff and eating the bread dough. Oh. And I couldn't believe it. They were floating by the boat, and I had a propane stove on my little boat, and also a coal stove on there. So I went out with my skiff, and I gathered up all these loaves of bread that were floating around. You've heard of bread upon the water. Mm-hmm. Biblical connotation there. So anyway, I gathered it all up, and we were baking bread as fast as we could, and I put these packages of dough up on the roof, and then they would explode up there, and then the dough would be dripping down the side of the boat.
No.
it was a very strange, but it was very good bread. It was whole wheat and, just excellent. So we baked, I don't know how many loaves of bread as fast as we could. Loaves are everywhere.
Well, that's wild. What made you call your boat the Nightmare?
Well, yeah, that was the name of it. It had a picture of a horse on the, graphically printed near the bow.
Oh,
and it was
okay.
a black horse, see? And the guy that did it had a sense of humor. I bought it from an older man named Nig Lippincott. He was a seiner. He had retired, him and his wife, Nora. And they just wanted to sell the boat, and it was a fast boat. It was built by Charlie Nelson, and it was built for Seine. It had a little turn-up in the stern. It had a 6-cylinder gray marine gas engine, and that thing, I could cross Cook Inlet in 4 hours with that. It was so fast. It was amazing.
Nice.
And it was very seaworthy. It was 36 feet long. And they just don't build boats that good anymore, I couldn't even... Charlie had built hundreds of boats, practically. He's a Norwegian. And he had... his wife was Eskimo, Nati, and he had 4 sons. And Charlie Boy and Gilbert and Gusty. And one day he come over to our homestead, and Charlie Nelson and my father were compatriots and good friends. My dad had built a 50-foot barge over there in Seldovia on the outside beach by the old Southwestern Cannery site. Well, Charlie built a 50-foot boat on the beach at the same time in Seldovia there, called the Viking. It was a regular, bigger fishing boat, a tender, 50 foot long, and they later lengthened it to 60 feet over in Kodiak. But he was an excellent boat builder and worked really hard and fast. But anyway, they're walking down the beach in Tuxini Bay, and they showed up one day, and they've come to visit us. And Charlie Boy had just got out of the Army, his son there, and he got an AR, a 30 caliber M1 or M2, I don't know what it was, but it had 30 caliber clips, and it was fully automatic. You could flip a switch and just pull a trigger, and it would shoot off 30 rounds. Well, I was walking with Gusty and Charlie Boy. I was just a little kid. I was about 10 years old at the time. And Charlie Nelson and my dad were walking up front about 200 yards, and they're yelling back and forth and waving their arms. And a brown bear was walking right behind them as if trying to take in the conversation. But, Charlie Boy couldn't shoot it because he might kill his father or my dad, so he didn't know what to do. He kind of lined up between the bear and I don't know what the bear was going to do, but he was probably just curious to find out what was going on, all that noise.
That's funny.
So anyway, Charlie let loose with his automatic weapon, and he started chewing up the sand behind the bear, and he brought the barrel up slowly until the bullets entered the bear and killed it. And Charlie and my dad turned around, looked at the bear, and then kept on walking and arguing.
Oh, wow. That's wild. So what'd you do with the bear? Obviously you used it for something, right?
Yeah, they skinned it out, and kept some of the claws and the trophies and stuff. Brown bears aren't very good to eat, but they're kind of a pest over there. Back in those days, they were just considered like vermin, And so, anyway, my neighbor, Joe Munger, that I was talking about earlier, how he got his wife over there, well, he was going to go trapping one year, the first year, I think, or second year, he trapped over there, and he met up with 2 other fellows that were going to go trapping in the same general area. One was much further south at Bruin Bay. They call it, it's about another 30 miles south of Silver Salmon Creek, I'd say, maybe, behind Augustine Island. Augustine is a volcano out in the middle of the water there, and they got Bruin Bay and Boulder Bay, and he was going to trap in Bruin Bay. So Then the third guy they met, he was going to travel over to Lake Iliamna, which is inland, and the temperatures there can drop down to 40 below zero and stay there all winter, for months at a time. So to save money, they decided to charter a Widgeon. A Widgeon is a twin-engine aircraft, amphibious aircraft. They have pontoons and wheels that can let down to go up the beach and stuff. So they decided to charter that and put all their gear in it. Well, Joe Munger, he gathered up all of his gear for that winter. What makes this story interesting is the fact that the type of gear they used in those days. He had a Zenith transoceanic radio battery that lasts about almost a year. These batteries are like 2 feet long and 8 inches by 6 inches, and they fit in the back of your Zenith radio. And he had a number of conibear traps. He had about 75 snares, and he had some regular number 2 Newhouse traps. He had 2 slabs of bacon. It was salted bacon, and 150 pounds of flour. He had 50 pounds of sugar in sacks, and he had a keg of butter. They come in little churns of butter kegs back in those days. It was salted butter, and they'd last for forever, practically. And canned meat, and he had all kinds of, salt and pepper, everything he needed to last the winter. So he gathered up all of his materials and put them on the Widgeon, and the guy for Bruin Bay showed up, and he only had about half as much food as Joe Munger did. He had traps and a few snares. And then the guy that was going to go over to Iliamna Lake, which is inland, where it's really cold and everything, he showed up, and all he had was a 5-gallon bucket of lard and a 2-inch auger, a hatchet, and a .22 rifle. And that's all he, and a case of hardtack, crackers, and a little sack of bright finishing nails. And so, anyway, he dropped these guys off. He dropped Munger off, and the plane took off and left everybody at their desired locations. And come by spring, Munger's about out of grub by April, and he's been eating beaver tail and eating some of the carcasses that he's been trapping, And he figures, well, the guy in Bruin Bay down there must be dead by now. He must be starving to death. And he just knew that guy over at Iliamna Lake had to be dead a long time ago, because he didn't have any food when he went over there. All he had was a .22 rifle and no traps, nothing. So he's just wondering, how these guys are going to survive. So, and this is a professional trapper from Minnesota is thinking this, So Joe's finally, the plane shows up in May, middle of May, and he gets on there, and he's got quite a few marten and wolf hides, and so a little mink and beaver. It's a beaver area where he traps. There's lots of ponds in there around the Silver Salmon Creek. It's along the beach. So anyway, he went down to Bruin Bay, and the guy was starving. He was out of grub. He hadn't eaten in a couple of days, and he had almost not quite as much fur as Joe Munger had, but he did okay, So they fly over Lake Iliamna, and Joe's thinking to himself, this guy's got to be dead, and they're never going to find him. He was at the head of the lake, the northeast side of it. It's a big, long lake, by the way. Iliamna Lake is almost 100 miles long and about 25 miles wide. It's huge. It's an inland sea, practically. There's even supposedly a lake monster or two that live in there. But they landed with a Widgeon. I guess they landed on the ice, and they saw a cabin there, and there was smoke coming out of it. And they went inside the cabin, and nobody around, but there was a bear stew on the stove, and the guy showed up, and he hadn't lost any weight. He was just fine, and he had more fur. They put all his fur on the Widgeon aircraft. He had a huge pile of it, more fur than Munger ever saw before. So he's just wondering how this guy survived. And they're on the way back to Anchorage. Those old planes are pretty noisy, and he's trying to thinking to himself to get up the courage to ask him, how he did so well trapping.
Mm-hmm.
Finally yelling at him, and well, how'd you get all those fur? And the guy says, well, it's quite simple. You just drill a hole in the bottom of this spruce tree with this auger, and you take a stick and put a dab of lard down at the bottom of the hole and tap 3 of these finishing nails in there at an angle. And the mink comes along, sticks his head in there to get at the lard, and he can't pull it back out again, and then he freezes to death. Goes 60 below zero over there,
Mm-hmm.
So you just go around with your little hatchet and pull the nail back out and remove the frozen mink, and tap the nail back in, and then, and the trap's reset. So that's, how he got all the fur, and just, no snares, no traps, no nothing, just an auger and some right finishing nails and a hatchet.
Nice.
It makes a good story anyway.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
It's true.
Well, The Adventures of Henry Kroll. You should put you need to put a book out with that one. A lot of these adventures.
Well,
huh?
I've started a book on it years ago about all these characters that I knew like that. I'm calling it Legends of the North, but I don't know if I'll ever finish it. But my brother told me this story. My brother Herbie. He'd bought a brand new 36-foot Leclerc boat. They're built in Seattle near the University Bridge by Dave Leclerc. He was an excellent boat builder there, and they were gill netters designed to fish salmon primarily. But my brother was trying to fish halibut late in the year over in the middle of Prince William Sound, and he's traveling across. That's between Cordova and Seward. There's a large inland body of water, and Montague Island is sort of shelters. It's a big long island, shelters this area. And anyway, he saw a skiff out there drift in the middle of Prince William Sound. He came up on it, and there's a big native kid in this skiff. And he can't get his 50 horsepower Mercury outboard started. Well, we use 50 horse outboards, so Herbie and I are both experts at repairing those things and getting them running again. That's all we've ever used all our lives,
Mm-hmm.
And we had bigger ones in the old days when gas was cheap. We had 110 horse and 100 horse and, 6 cylinders. We used to go really fast, but anyway, we demoted down to 50 horse when things got tough. And so a guy, he asked him to bring the motor up on the deck of Herb's boat. He called his boat name the Penga, which means money in Finnish. Penga, I believe. Well, anyway, Herb, he runs some gas through the carburetors and cleaned the gas tank out. It had a little water in it, and the guy just passed this motor up to him like with one hand. He was a huge guy, this huge Par Indian guy who was just like a monster, Bigfoot. Anyway, Herbie could barely lift this outboard, and he passed it back down to him and put it on the back of the Boston Whaler, and he took off, Well, later on, he met him in Seward, and I called him Billy Quapala. Anyway, apparently he was trained by his father to live off the land, and they were natives, and he wore a bearskin vest and hardly any clothes, just a pair of blue jeans, a belt, and bearskin and bare chest. And he's out there, all weather, doesn't matter, rain, cold weather, whatever. And they drink seal oil, and it keeps them warm from the inside, you see.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a fire in your belly when you drink that seal oil.
Wow.
And it's got tremendous energy to it.
Mm-hmm.
But what he was doing, he would hunt sea lion, which weigh up to 2,000 pounds. And they'd take that Boston Whaler and he'd run it up on the seal rocks outside of Seward there, and jump out and he'd shoot a sea lion, and he'd push the boat off and run over there and grab the sea lion and drag it in the boat. Well, a normal person couldn't drag a sea lion into a boat. This guy was, powerful. My brother told me this story, and anyway, he get in trouble, or he'd go into a bar and he'd make some comment about natives or whatever, and they'd go flying right out to the window. The guy was tremendously strong, And when he wanted to go to Kodiak, he just put a 55-gallon drum of gasoline in his Boston Whaler and just head for Kodiak, mixed gas, And, normal people don't do that. That's a big ocean, And so I found out later that he actually had a twin brother after I wrote a story, and it was published in a Canadian magazine about this guy. And so back in the 70s, the hippies in California discovered Kodiak, Alaska. They could go right up there and work in the canneries and enjoy the town and the scenery and everything. And the whole town got to the point where there was like 5,000 of them moved in there, and the local law enforcement didn't know what to do about it. They couldn't arrest them because some of them had rich daddies back in California, and they'd get sued. The city would get sued, and they're all smoking dope, which is illegal, of course. And they're camped out everywhere in the boats and old boat houses, and out there at the park, they had some of those old cannons and bunkhouses, or not bunkhouses, but pillbox made of concrete about a 2 foot thick, left over from World War II, that were guarding the island. They're all rusted up, of course, and they're camping out in these parks and stuff. So they just didn't know what to do. So Billy showed up in town, and the chief of police, they knew the kid there, and they usually leave him alone. But if they had to subdue him, it usually took about 5 cops to get him before they could put him in jail or something. They didn't want to mess with him. But in this case, they agreed to hire him for $6,000 to get rid of these hippies. So they hired this mercenary kid because they couldn't do it themselves. They'd get sued. So they gave him $3,000, and old Billy, he ran around and threw their motorcycles over the cliff and threatened them and knocked their tents down and scared the hell out of them.
Oh, no.
And the Tustamina ferry came into town. They had the biggest load of passengers they ever had when they left, and they gave him the other $3,000, and he was happy, This is an old true story, but there's no other way to handle the situation, at the time.
Right. Sounds like a Bigfoot on the loose, except it's a person.
Yeah, just about,
Wow.
So anyway, I don't know if this is his twin brother or not, but I heard this story much, much later when I was living in Seldovia. Mary and I built a house there in 1984. And there was a guy named Bert Poland had moved into the elderly housing there, and he had worked in Kodiak as a fisherman. At the time, he met this kid. He was working on a dragger for bottom fish. They're dragging for cod, and about the middle of Kodiak Island on the ocean side of it, out to the west, the south side of the island, and it got too rough for this 80-foot steel dragger, and they couldn't handle the gear or the banging the doors around when they haul up the trawl, and so they pulled into Half Moon Bay, which is not really good protection or anything, but it's a place where a lot of the boats will pull in to get out of some of the swell, so they can work on their gear. And he was overhauling gear and getting all the little trash fish and stuff out of the nets and working on that. And Bert Poland was, and he looked up, and here comes a Boston Whaler with a kid in it, and he just got a bearskin vest, and he's all greasy and his belly running down the front of him. And he's always got is a 30-06 rifle and no scope on it or anything. And he's wearing an army hat with ear flaps. So, the kid asked, the skipper knew him, apparently. So he hollers up there, and you got anything to eat? And the skipper says, oh, yeah, we got some frozen steaks. We got chicken and stuff. And he says, well, hang on, I'll be right back. And he disappears with the Boston Whaler, takes off. And about a half an hour later, he comes back, and he's got about 18 ptarmigan. So he threw them all up on deck, and the skipper says, Bert Poland, help them, butcher those ptarmigan. We'll have them for dinner. We'll fry them up, And so Bert was skinning them out, and he noticed there's no bullet holes in the ptarmigan.
Mm-hmm.
And so he's wondering how he killed those ptarmigan. How did he get those, And so finally he asked the kid, well, how'd you get the ptarmigan? And the kid says, with my hat. And, waited a few more minutes, 10 minutes, skinned a few more ptarmigan, and he says, well, how did you get them with your hat? The kid says, well, you just go up where the ptarmigan are, and you throw your hat over the top of the ptarmigan, and they think it's a hawk. So they cower down in the grass, and you run over there and grab them, wring their neck. And apparently the ear flaps fly out there, and they think it's a hawk.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So this is about survival in Alaska.
I was going to say, listen up, everybody.
Nobody. These are top secrets, and nobody knows this stuff.
Well, it'll keep you alive, right?
Well, sure. I've eaten ptarmigan myself, but I use it at 22 Beretta, and you really have to be a good shot, with a short barrel. But anyway,
that's wild.
I fished salmon in Sydney Bay over there 65 years, more than that, actually. I don't want to say the exact number. And I plan on, and I may get the Discovery Channel in there to film our operation next summer. I've contacted them.
Oh, good. Yeah, you mentioned that.
A whole bunch of pictures.
Okay, good. You mentioned that the last time you were on the show. I was wondering what the status was on that, so... Good.
Well, they're still considering it. I've been reviewing some of their shows, and there a lot of them are interesting. When I was laying over there at the Heritage House, I had, Discovery Channel on the TV, and I just about watched all of them. From the gold miners to the moonshiners making moonshine and, Carolinas and Tennessee and all over. Well, we smoke a lot of fish, and I'm building a road to a gold mine where I can dredge gold and few things over at our place that would be interesting for the Discovery Channel.
Right.
We also move our nets offshore at low tide because the tide goes out where we fish and there's nothing out there but mud. So we have to move them out about a mile offshore, try to set our nets in around 7-8 foot of water. And as the tide goes out, they wind up in 3 foot of water, and we catch fish at between 3 and 4 feet of water. And sometimes we catch a lot of king salmon out there. And so, gaffing those kings on board and catching those, and sometimes we catch a big halibut too, it'd be kind of exciting for the Discovery Channel to film that.
Oh yeah, I used to love salmon.
And, we're not catching sport fish over there. The fish that we catch are on the west side of Cook Inlet, and they're destined for small streams up further up the inlet, I think, and possibly even Crescent River, where we fish, is a good-sized river about 1.5 miles from where we live. It's called Crescent River. It comes out of a glacier lake, Crescent Lake. And we have a lot of bears that fish the mouth of the river there, and some bears in our yard grazing grass over there. So, this would make great footage for the Discovery Channel people, My wife is out there hanging nets, and there's a big brown bear behind her eating grass, and we had a big fat black bear. They're open season anytime, just 100 yards away, 150 yards away, and I wish my kids weren't so lazy. They could have shot it, and we could have ate them because they're really good to eat. You got to cure those hams.
Oh wow!
And,
So what do they normally eat over there? They just eat the grass? I mean, what are there berries?
Well, yeah, there isn't anything for them to eat except the grass that comes out on the flats in the springtime, and it's kind of goose tongue grass, and it's not bad. You can eat it yourself, and it's very rich in minerals because it grows right on the mud itself, on the mud flats, and the tide brings in salt water over the top of it all the time, and it's full of trace minerals. So. Anyway, it's and we also, harvest some other wild foods around there. Plantain, it's a natural medicine.
Okay.
And we harvest quite a few blueberries later on when they come out, and we put up lots of jam ourselves for our own use.
Well, that's great. I love blueberries. So you make me hungry every time I talk to you on this.
And we have here, right where we live, we lucked out on our property. We have the low bush cranberries. They're called lingonberries, and those are my favorite. Which you just sort of cook them whole, and you put those on pancakes. Those are my favorites of all of them. And we have salmon berries, which are quite large, but not very many. They're around where the streams are, inland more. Where we've got and watermelon berries. Then we got high bush cranberries, which are rather poison, but you can make a medicine for arthritis with them.
That's good.
There are sometimes so many of them you can't believe how many.
Those grow naturally?
Yeah, they're what do they call those things? They make wine out of elderberries.
Oh, okay.
Those two, yeah, elderberry wine. I made some this fall. It was good for arthritis. And then they have these high bush cranberries, which are larger.
Do
you guys make the bushes are 6 foot tall.
Oh, wow.
Or taller, 7 foot tall.
It's pretty good. So do you make your own moonshine too?
Well, I never have the time, in fishing. I used to make beer a long time ago, but I don't do that anymore either. But, there are legal places here in Soldotna now where I can buy moonshine. I don't know what it costs, but I got out towards Sterling. It's a short drive, about 15-mile drive from here. They're making moonshine over there, and they've got different varieties of it. And there's also many microbreweries popped up here. And they legalized pot a few months ago, and they're just so busy making more laws to restrict the use of legalized pot. You cannot believe. All the municipalities, some of them have banned the smoking of it within city limits, and on and on and on and on. Gives them something to do, I guess. It's just nutty.
I didn't realize they legalized it over there too, because I'm in Colorado, and they did in Colorado as well. Of course, they made a ton of money. Yeah.
They voted it in here, but you have to get all kinds of licenses. You got to get training. You got to know how to handle the money, because the government might want to know how much money you make so they can tax you. And a lot of things are up in the air, and they're trying to make all these regulations, and the lawyers are getting rich, trying to working for both sides. And it's just a circus, basically, the way I see it. It's really quite funny.
Well, it is, and of course, I think being where you are is probably a little bit more, more nature oriented and a little more peaceful, I would say.
So anyway, the last few weeks I've been playing around with the giant idea. I was reading Zacharias Sitchin's book on where they're mining gold in South America around Cusco and Tiwanaku over there, and they actually they had a huge temple that they had built in Cusco for the giants to live in, apparently, and they covered the walls with gold plates. And they had gold on the cornices of the building. It was nailed on all over, thin sheets of it. And also the buildings that were at Pumupuku and Tiwanaku at their high altitude, they were also covered with gold. And one archaeologist, I wish I could remember his name, it took a piece of this gold that was nailed to one of the buildings to a conference, and he showed it around and had actual 2 or 3 gold nails still in it, and it holds in this plate showing where the gold, nails had been. They had a way of drilling into the rock, and they would nail this gold covering over the buildings. Well, I got to thinking, why? And I looked up how much gold the world has, and I got an audit of all the nations of the world, of which I clipped and put in the book. And we have 8,300 tons of gold in deposit somewhere in the United States, and I think Germany is number 2 and 1,300 tons, and China is about number 6. They got 1,200 tons of gold, metric tons, you know. There's many lists of people all the way down the line of private holders in this audit that show. It's very interesting to see that. Now, why do we use this gold for anyway?
Mm-hmm.
If it doesn't back our currency, why do they have it on deposit, and why is it so valuable anymore? It used to be the currency between nations.
Mm-hmm.
However, it isn't anymore. They use petrodollars and oil and other things, you see. So, apparently, mankind, according to Zechariah Sitchin's translation of these Sumerian scrolls, these Anunnaki came here at least 3 times. The first time they dropped off his son, Enki, and his job was to get the gold out of seawater, but the process they were using wasn't adequate for their needs, so he started mining in South Africa, and they had miners they had brought here called Igigi. Well, there is a city down there they say is twice the size of Los Angeles, or Los Angeles and London put together, and they've been excavating it now for about 10 years or more. There's 2 archaeologists working on it, and they have crews of people digging the city out of there. And it's huge, and it's buried under 20 feet of gravel and mud. Possibly was brought in by a gigantic flood. When they're saying the Antarctic ice sheets may have slipped or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, anyway, after their gold mining operation was destroyed, they moved up to between the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers, and they built these ziggurats up there in the town of Uruk and the pyramids and other structures, and they mined gold there for a while. And then King Solomon was much later, and he was trading gold, and he had gold mines all over the earth. And apparently, according to Zechariah Sitchin, what they do is they were spraying it in their atmosphere to keep their planet warmer, because it's in this orbit that's much further out. It goes out to 300 AU, which would be 300 Earth distances from our own sun, and then comes in close every 2,600 years or 3,600 years. Well, apparently they arrived here again to pick up the gold, and about 4,000 years ago, and there was no ice on Antarctica at the time, and they could run ships freely between Africa and Antarctica, and there were towns on the coast of Antarctica, and it shows up on the Perry Reefs maps that the coastline is accurate within a half a degree of longitude, and the U.S. Navy used radar to check the coastline and matches these ancient maps perfectly.
Mm-hmm.
And apparently at that time, South America was connected to Antarctica. So there were no westerly winds to buck against to get over to South America. So they could send ships over there to pick up gold and vice versa, traverse back and forth. But since I wrote the book Philosopher's Stone, I had a little bit of insight in how you can turn gold into this white powder of gold.
Mm-hmm.
You can burn it in an electric arc, and it turns it into ORMs, or orbitally rearranged monatomic elements, is the acronym for it, ORM, ORMES, and you can type that into YouTube and learn more about it. And it is used for life extension. It helps the mitochondria within your human cells metabolize food so that they can do correct cell division without losing any DNA or telomeres at the end of the DNA code. So it boosts the energy supply for the mitochondria. But it has unique properties because what it is 2 gold atoms combined with all the protons in the center, and the electrons orbit in a ring, and they're Cooper paired in most cases. They orbiting in opposite directions.
Mm-hmm.
And it has anti-gravity properties. So if you spray it in that form of gold, you take the white powder of gold, you spray it in your atmosphere, it would actually not only keep the planet warmer, but it would make everybody on the planet live longer and become smarter.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in our case, they were spraying, it started with evergreen air, they were spraying defoliant over in Vietnam, and so they could shoot the Vietnamese and these airplanes and C-130s, C-125s. And then they moved over to Oklahoma, and they're spraying parquat and other defoliating material on the marijuana fields in Mexico for a while there. And then they want to keep them employed, so they gave them a job of spraying aluminum powder and boron over the major cities in the United States. It's called chemtrails. Mm-hmm. It gets into the water supply and makes everybody stupid, and breathing it in makes everybody dumber, and it just keeps the population under control, so you can't really think for yourself. Mm-hmm. And everybody has to just sort of go through a zombie state. And they've done the same thing with the food supply. They give us the fluoride, and it gets all of these chemicals, and the aluminum gets into the food.
Right.
I can't mention the name of these chemical companies that got the patents on growing the food in this aluminum-contaminated soil. Otherwise, they'll cut me off the air like they did the last time we were trying to talk on here.
Oh, sure. Go ahead, Henry. No, it doesn't matter. But if you want to mention them, you can. But yeah. No, it's weird how we're being poisoned. There's no doubt about that.
Well, I mentioned some names there, and you had to call me back about 3 times. I'm telling
you, you got dropped. Yeah, they were after you. Something was going on last time. I'm glad I got you back this time with no.
I'm just making a mental note here not to do that. So anyway, yeah, I know. So I put this book together. It's already up to about 190 pages, but I'm putting lots and lots of pictures in there.
Right.
And apparently, I got to thinking.
Okay, Henry, we're going to head for a break. Hang on, hold that thought. We'll be right back, everybody. Please stay tuned. Ravenstar's Witching Hour. My special guest is Captain Henry Kroll.